In this video we're going to have a look at a Python function that has two arguments, two input parameters, but exhibits no return value. Let's consider some typical calls to functions, and I'm going to show this with a little snippet of a structure chart. And here we can see a call to a function, and in this particular case what we have a function with no arguments and no return value. In other words, we're not passing in any data and we're not getting any data out from this particular function. There are no input parameters and we're getting no return value. Another example is shown here. We call a function and from this we take a return value. Now this is a function with no arguments, i.e. there is no input parameters, but it does have a return value. Another example is shown here of a function to which we pass an input argument, an input parameter, but this is a function with an argument and no return value. Now I'm showing this with just one argument going in, one input parameter, but in fact we could have more than one if we so wished. Another example is shown here where we have a function being called and we pass it an input argument and it returns a value. Now this is an example of a function with an argument and a return value, and of course there could be more than one return value, there could be more than one input to this particular function, more than one input argument, which we can also call input parameters. Previous videos in this playlist have actually shown this structure chart where we can see modules are being called and parameters are being passed between these modules. And what we're going to do here, we're going to have a look at this structure chart again, but in particular we're going to be concentrating on this particular function here, which we can see is called display wage slip, and it's being passed input arguments, name and net pay. So we're going to actually implement this particular function in this video. Here you can see I've taken the module out of the structure chart so we can just concentrate on it, and we can see what we have. We have a module with the name display wage slip, and this module takes in two data couples called name and net pay. Now when we flip over to the code and we look at how we implement this as a Python function, we can say that the name of the function is going to be called display wage slip, and the input arguments to this particular function are going to be name and net pay. If we now consider the module specification for this as shown here, we can see that we're concerned with function name, input parameters, local variables, mechanics and return values. Now straight away we can see that the function name is display wage slip, the input parameters are name and net pay, local variables, well, we have none for this particular module. Now the mechanics, which is what the function's actually going to do, if you like, this is the algorithm for the function, what the code is inside the function, well, it's going to do something pretty straightforward. It's going to display the employee name and their net pay. Now the return value we can see I've labelled up as none because this particular function does not return any values. If we have a look at the code as it appears in Python for this particular module, it is as appears here. And there are two distinct things we need to highlight. We know this is the header for the function, and we know this here is the body of the function. If we concentrate on the header for a moment, what we can see is we have this reserved word here, def, which is an abbreviation for definition, and that tells us that we're just about to define something, and in this case we're going to be defining the display wage slip function. If we have a look here, we can see that at the end of the line we have this colon here. Now that colon together with this indent tells us that this slot is going to be the body of the actual function. Now if we have a look at the body of the function, we can see it has no local variables here. There are no variables that I'm using, and there is no return value. If there was a return value, in this area you'd see the word return and then the name of variable that you were going to return. But in this case we can see that we're dealing with a function that doesn't have a return value. If we look to the actual name as shown here, well, that name we can see is here in the snippet of the structure chart, and it's here in the module specification. If we look here, we can see that we have two names. One is called name and the other is net pay. Now these are going to be the parameters, the input parameters for this function. And in fact, these are referred to as formal parameters. And I think that's important that you remember that in description there. They're called formal parameters. Now these two names, the name and the net pay, are sitting there waiting to be given something to work with. Now whatever it is they're given, we can see that we're going to display it here within this print, and we're going to display the net pay here after it's been formatted appropriately to be 2 decimal places. Let's now test the function to see if it actually works, and to achieve this we're going to use a testing program, and the testing program is going to call the display wage slip function and send it a parameter called employee name and employee net pay. And employee name and employee net pay are the arguments to the function, and we also call these parameters, but we give them the name actual parameters to distinguish them from the formal parameters that we were discussing a moment ago. Or you can simply call these the arguments. Now of course, if I've got employee name and employee net pay that I'm sending to display wages, it means that the testing program needs two variables, as you can see here, the employee name variable and the employee net pay variable. Now the testing program is shown here, and if we look at the first line, it's straightforward. What's happening is we're going to have an input function giving a user-friendly message, and as programmers we then respond to that user-friendly message and we're going to enter the employee name. The next line, we can see that what that's doing is going to ask us as a programmer to enter the net pay of the employee. Now just an aside here, remember we're testing this particular module independently, and I'm the programmer entering appropriate values to see if the actual display wage slip function does what it's supposed to do. We then plug it into the structure chart that we looked at the beginning of this particular video. And of course this line here, well, this is the call to the function. This name is this name here, and that tells us we're calling this module. And in brackets you can see we have employee name and employee net pay. Now those are the arguments that will be passed to the display wage slip module. Let's have a look at the process of this particular testing program running. So imagine now I've simply seen please enter the name of the employee. I will then enter Fred Smith, and Fred Smith gets stored in employee name. Then the program's going to ask me to enter the net pay, so I'll enter something appropriately, and that'll get stored in employee net pay as £234.45p. Now of course these variables contain Fred Smith and 234.45, and these will become the actual parameters, as you can see me writing them at the side here, that will be sent to display wage slip. And of course display wage slip will now actually display Fred Smith and the net pay, as you can see here. Now this is the test program and the function, and we're going to go through this one line at a time. Now the first line to execute is this one, where we have the user-friendly string is going to appear on the screen, as you can see here. Now I'm going to, as the programmer, enter into here the name of the employee, and you can see I am entering Fred Smith. Now the instant I hit return, Fred Smith will be stored in this variable here, employee name. The next thing to happen is this line's going to be executed, and the user-friendly string please enter net pay of employee will appear on the runtime, as you can see here. Now I'm going to, as the programmer, enter an appropriate value, and I'm going to enter 234.45, and this value, when I hit return, will be stored in employee net pay. This line is now a call to the function, and we can see that the call is this line because this name corresponds to this name here. And in brackets, you can see I've got the actual parameters, and we also call those arguments, employee name, and we know employee name is storing Fred Smith. So Fred Smith is something name now has. Employee net pay, which we know is 234.45, is something that net pay has. And we know there's an ordering taking place here. Whatever's in this one will be in this one. Whatever's in this one will be in this one here. Consequently, we are now going to execute the body of this particular function. So the first line to be executed will be this one here, and that's going to print a space, then the wage slip, and so on. And when the function executes, this is what you're going to get out. And we can see that this line has been responsible for that. Wage slip here, well, this is the line that was responsible for that. We've got here a space. This is the line that was responsible for printing that line space. And this line, well, we can see the name has been placed here. This, well, that's the formal parameter that's been passed Fred Smith. And we can see Fred Smith is printed here. We then come on to this line. So this user-friendly string is printed here. And then we format the net pay to 2 decimal places. And of course, this net pay is the formal parameter, which was here in the header of the function, which received the 234.45 from employee net pay. And we can see that gets displayed here. This print statement then prints this line space here. And then, of course, we've finished executing the function and we return. And, of course, there's nothing else to execute, so the program ends. So we've just seen a function that is called, that takes 2 arguments, and nothing is returned. There is no return statement inside the actual definition of the function. Check out the supporting website for these videos, and also consider subscribing to the YouTube channel. Also consider subscribing to the Google Plus circle that relates to these videos. Why not also consider following me on Twitter, where I will issue a tweet every time I've uploaded a new video to the channel and the supporting websites.